Okay, I promise that this isn't going to be a super sad video. At least, that's certainly not the goal here. As you probably saw in the title, I recently lost one of my closest friends, my 80-year-old grandfather. And I've known him for as long as I can remember. And while I haven't lived in the same state as him for many years, we maintained a really close relationship by frequently talking over the phone. I would try and call him on my commute every day to every other day for a number of years, actually. In fact, I've tried calling him a few times by accident, just out of habit, only to realize I can't talk to him, at least until we meet again. As you can imagine, these days have been filled with reflection, both of my own life and the life that my grandfather lived. And today I'm going to do my best in an attempt to share some of what I've learned throughout this process. Historically, these are areas I didn't have a ton of experience in, and in many ways, I still don't. So this is by no means a masterclass in death or life. However, whether you are young or you feel like you're going to live forever or you feel death approaching, I think that there might be something here for all of you. In a way, I almost feel guilty when describing my relationship with my grandfather because I understand how rare it is and what a luxury it is. My uncle wrote an eloquent summary of his life, and it's better than what I could have written on it, so I'm going to read some of it here. So, he says, "My father was born in Port Orchard in Washington State to a native Haida Indian half-breed ex-convict under an assumed name and a white woman with a birth defect. His aunt was a prostitute in Idaho who claimed she was Spanish to explain her dark skin before she took her life. His uncles were loggers, most of whom never made it to 30 years of age before murder, suicide, disease, or accidents took their lives. His mom died when he was 9. He was fostered out to his aunt and uncle on his non-native side. After high school, he worked in the fields of eastern Washington, where he changed the trajectory of 3 generations after him by deciding to go to college, where he graduated with a PhD in entomology. He received 0 government assistance his entire life and was never formally recognized as a Native American, and he would never state anything about what I just wrote, and would only be thankful to the individuals that helped him. He started his own successful company in neuroscience research and pulmonary function testing, and retired wealthy, but always drove cheap cars and lived frugally. Even at 80, while he struggled with COVID, he sat only thinking how he could still add value. He thought of how he could still add value, even to the very end. I find it quite difficult to distill the most meaningful parts of someone you love and share that with others. But I think what I just read touches on a lot of points. So when I was about 17, I actually tried to do something similar and share something about my grandfather in one of my first sermons. And this sermon was basically a discussion on how I'd been discipled by my grandfather. And when some people hear the word discipleship, they think of maybe meeting with somebody once a month or so, maybe meeting at a coffee shop. And sure, those are awesome things when executed properly. But I was blessed with a grandfather who loved to spend time with me and disciple me in a biblical way. Biblical discipleship is always coupled with prayer and a study of God's word, both for the person who is actually doing the discipling and the disciple itself. It transcends cultural boundaries or not being able to relate through the love of God, and its main goal is to create a transformed disciple. My grandfather had an uncommon love of nature, and he loved to take us outdoors, to the beach where we grew up in Washington State, or head up to the mountains. And along the way, he would point out different species of birds that were migrating through our area, but he would also point out the magnificent design that has been put in place by our Creator. My grandfather spent countless hours with me doing what many adults would consider monotonous or metronomic. However monotonous these activities must have seemed, he frequently tried to redeem these times by bringing the conversation to spiritual things. One of my cousins sent out a quote by G.K. Chesterton that very much summarizes the experience I had with my grandfather, and it reads, "A child kicks his legs rhythmically through excess, not absence of life. Because children have abounding vitality, because they are in spirit, fierce and free, therefore they want things repeated and unchanged. They always say, 'Do it again,' and the grown-up person does it again until he is nearly dead. For grown-up people are not strong enough to exult in monotony. It may not be automatic necessity that makes all daisies alike. It may be that God makes every daisy separately, but has never got tired of making them. It may be that he has the eternal appetite of infancy, for we have sinned and grown old, and our Father is younger than we. The repetition in nature may not be a mere recurrence. It may be a theatrical encore." In my previous job, I was working in an office where I was treating patients that were primarily over the age of 50, and so a lot of them were grandparents. Towards the end of the week, by the time I was getting to Thursday, I would ask them what they were going to do during the weekend for fun, and a lot of them would groan and complain about having to babysit their grandkids. And I realized things can be complicated in families, but it always made me a little sad because I felt like they didn't know what they were missing out on. Mark chapter 10, verse 14 says, "But when Jesus saw this, he was indignant, and he said to them, 'Permit the children to come to me, but do not hinder them, for the kingdom of God belongs to such as these.'" Jesus was mad at the disciples for not letting the children come to him because the children weren't viewed as important. And Matthew also tells a similar story in chapter 19, saying, "Then some of the children were brought to him, that he may lay hands on them and pray. And the disciples rebuked them. But Jesus said, 'Let the children alone. Do not hinder them for coming to me, for the kingdom of heaven belongs to such as these.' After laying his hands on them, he departed from there." Jesus makes it obvious that children are not a burden that should be loathed. They are a blessing that should be celebrated. That doesn't mean that they don't require effort, quite the contrary, but this work should always be viewed as a blessing. Psalm 127 says, "Behold, children are a gift of the Lord. The fruit of the womb is a reward. Like arrows in the hand of a warrior, so are the children of one's youth. How blessed is the man whose quiver is full of them. They will not be ashamed when they speak with their enemies in the gate." So I have met or heard of many people who run different ministries that do allegedly amazing things and they devote tons of time to them. But then they spend precious little time with their families, and then their children end up as a tragic spiritual train wreck. And that's so backwards. Your family is your ministry. They're so much more important than whatever else you think is your ministry. Ministries will die with you. Your spouse, your children, your grandchildren should always be your primary ministry. Nothing else should come even close. Let me very briefly explain why. So if each person just made 2 disciples, for example, if a husband, they would have to make 2, and a wife would have to make 2 disciples. And those could be your children. But if every person did that in just 40 generations, there would be more than 1 trillion disciples. In 40 generations, that's more people than have ever existed on the face of this planet. That's the power of discipleship. And that's one of the reasons why discipling your children is so important. 3 John verse 3 through 4 says, "For I was very glad when brethren came and testified to your truth, how you are walking in truth. I have no greater joy than this, than to hear my children walking in the truth." John says he has no greater joy than to hear his children are walking in the truth. And I realize, talking about this may bring significant pain to some, as lots of people don't have their children walking in the truth. And some of that is the children's choices that they make. But what can you do about it now? Even if you're not in this situation, what do you take joy in? More accurately, what have you taken joy in? What does your search for history reveal about this? Will the things that you do or the plans that you make provide a rich spiritual legacy, or will they meet the same end as your physical body? 1 Corinthians speaks of the importance of building a strong Christian legacy. Chapter 3, verse 11 begins, "For no man can lay a foundation other than that which is laid, which is Jesus Christ. Now if any man builds on the foundation, which is gold, silver, precious stones, wood, hay, straw, each man's work will become evident, for the day will show it, because it is revealed with fire, and the fire itself will test the quality of each man's work. If any man's work which he has built on it remains, he will receive a reward. If any man's work is burned up, he will suffer loss, but he himself will be saved, yet as though through fire." Build on the foundation that is Christ, with something that lasts. Is your primary ministry something that will die with you? If it dies with you, that's not discipleship. Some of you watching this don't have children yet, but possibly want them in the future. What are you going to do now that will prepare to disciple? There are things you can be doing right now to prepare for that. And the Bible's very clear that we should be doing this. What do you need to do to add to your spiritual legacy? And what do you need to stop that adds nothing to your spiritual legacy? Every one of you that is watching this video will die at some point. And I was there when my grandfather passed right in front of me. And it was a very emotional time because I love my grandfather. I'm going to miss talking to him. I'm going to miss sharing, the new things that my daughter is doing. I'm going to miss asking theological questions, asking for book recommendations. I'm going to miss discussing my next video topic or letting him know that a video has been uploaded because he loved to watch them. That's gone now. And to be honest, that hurts. The sting of death is very real, but thanks be to God who gives us victory over death through Jesus. One of my last conversations with him was thanking him for all the time that he had spent with me. It was just the two of us in the room, and it was hard to speak without getting choked up, which obviously I didn't want him to see me sad, because it might make him sad. So again, I thanked him. I told him that I was going to miss him, but I was also excited for him. He was going to be home soon, and our separation even would be transient. And I attempted to quote one of his favorite verses, the verse in John that we read earlier, that I have no greater joy than this, than to hear your children my children walking in the truth. And fighting to hold back the tears, I told him, you did it. And he smiled and he says something along the lines of, that's all that matters. And a few days later, he gets to hear the very voice of Jesus himself. Well done, good and faithful servant. Enter into the joy of your master. To those who are not at death's door, talking about heaven is easy to talk about, and it sounds good. However, the death process can be a terrifying thing. And it seems counterintuitive, because death itself shouldn't be, if you're a Christian, that is. But when your body doesn't function like it's supposed to, certain things change. And it's easy to confuse a fear of death with a fear of pain. And when you're walking with somebody through this, I would encourage you to be patient with them, because some of what the fear that they experience is because of the fear of pain. As the biology of the death process takes its course, it also can affect certain aspects of one's personality. For some, this can result in augmenting good aspects of who they were, and for others, it can potentially make things worse. If you don't spend a lot of time with someone, it can be hard to recognize when those changes occur. And one of the things I'm thankful for is that I tried to put a lot of time into my relationship with my grandfather. I wanted to spend as much time as I could with him, as much as I could reasonably spend. I would even help him go to the bathroom at the hospital, because I felt like it was more honoring to have family do it than to just relegating a nurse to do it. These are all good things to do, and I would encourage you to do them. However, when you reach the end like this, you can't make up for lost time by spending time at a hospital bedside. It's impossible. Don't wait until your loved one is on their deathbed, or even you yourself to be on your deathbed, to say sorry. Don't wait until then to thank people that need to be thanked. Don't wait until then to forgive. These kinds of situations should be avoided. And they can be avoided by starting with something simple, like just going through your contacts list, just giving people phone calls, see how they're doing. Don't just send them a text. They don't even have to be related to you, but you should definitely focus on those that are. Over time, you can direct those conversations to things that matter. And these are the sorts of conversations that I had with my grandfather that were super important to me, though I didn't fully appreciate them until I was older. The next clip I'm going to show you is very important to me, and it will give you a small glimpse into some of these conversations, so enjoy.
The greatest joy is to see your children going on in the truth, seeking to serve the Lord, to follow the Lord, and to share the gospel with others. Because that's, in the end, is the only thing that really gives life meaning. You think about raising a new child. You're bringing something into this world that has an eternal destiny. And realize it's really a very serious thing. And to seek to bring that child up in the fear of the Lord, because the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and to do things that will impact that child in a good way for the things of God. We live in a day where there's so much that can distract kids. They can spend hours playing video games or whatever, and I think, like Grandma said, you need to have daily Bible reading, make sure they understand it, have them participate in it, and daily prayer, and they should be able to see in the parents' walk that the things of God are meaningful to them. But I think it is important to try to be part of the grandchildren's lives. I enjoy doing things with them. Grandma's does a lot with birthday planning and things like that. And I enjoy looking at birds and bugs and those kind of things. But I think it's also important to try to talk about the things of God. And I think it's important to try to live when you're even older where the things of God are more important. Because sometimes I see older people, I think they could be more impactful, but they belong to a golf club and they spend so much time just golfing. Or they could be serving the Lord in different ways. Because a lot of times it's harder to do certain things when you're working full time, but when you're retired and you're older, serve the Lord too. And that's, I think, is something that's important for your grandchildren to see. And I think Grandma does her service in her way, and I try to do mine in my way. So success really is only before the judgment seat of Christ. Have you lived your life for Him? Have you shared the gospel with your children? Have you sought to obey the Lord? There are so many things that apply to the family. And I think one thing that's important is humility too. As parents, there's a lot of things I'm sure we could have done better had we been more humble about things. I think humility is important. I think, but yet again, I think we should emphasize the grace of God. We get more than we deserve.
We don't deserve anything.
Right, we don't deserve anything. So anyway, yes. So you see so you appreciate the grace of God. There are things that you see that you're very thankful for, but you don't have to take credit for those because really that's the work of the Spirit. So I think humility, thankfulness, and just living in view of the future, because that's what it's all about anyway. I remember some things that my uncle told me. He says, you know why there's so few shepherds, Christian people who are real shepherds? He says, when you go out and pick up a lamb that's fallen down and put it on your shoulders, you're going to get dirty too.
Because it got in the mud.
Right, because it got in the mud. So if you want to be a shepherd, you're going to get dirty in the process too. He says you just have to do that.
But I think it's really, really important for you to love one another, husband and wife, to love one another and to agree.
And forgive and forget.
Yeah, you asked me to know. Oh, I'm so happy. For you.
Yeah, and then I think it's important to know how to measure your love. I enjoyed what Albert Hayhoe said. He says, think of the person you most dislike, the person maybe you have the most hatred for, the person who's injured you the most. He says, the amount of love you have for that person is the amount of divine love you have in your heart. He says, because we were enemies of God. We were sinners. We rejected Him. We rebelled. And yet He still loved us. So the amount of divine love we have is the amount of love that we have toward the person who's most injured us and the person we most dislike. And sometimes those kinds of things are hard to grasp and get a hold of. So pick up dirty sheep. Love sinners.